The tale of the final days. In the heart of the world, where cities buzzed with life and people went about their days, a shadow began to loom. It was not the kind of shadow cast by the sun or the moon, but a darkness that whispered of things to come. This was the beginning of the end, the time spoken of in ancient texts and whispered in secret corners. The first sign was subtle. A man appeared. He was charismatic, with a voice that could sway crowds and a smile that promised peace. He came from the east, where the sun rises, and spoke of a new world order, one where nations would unite under a single banner. He promised to end wars, to bring prosperity, and to heal the wounds of the earth. His name was on every tongue, and soon he became the leader of the world. But those who studied the ancient prophecies knew that this man was not what he seemed. He was the Antichrist, the one who would deceive many. In secret, he made deals with dark forces, gathering power not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual realm as well. He signed a covenant with many nations, promising 7 years of peace. But it was a peace built on lies. 3.5 years passed, and the world seemed to flourish under his rule. But then, things began to change. The Antichrist broke his covenant and declared himself to be God. He demanded that all people worship him and receive a mark on their foreheads or hands, without which they could neither buy nor sell. This mark was known as the mark of the beast. Those who refused to take the mark were hunted down and persecuted. Many were martyred for their faith, but they held firm, knowing that the true king would soon return. This was the beginning of the Great Tribulation, a time of suffering unlike anything the world had ever known. The sun turned dark, and the moon glowed red like blood. Earthquakes shook the foundations of the world, and the seas roared with fury. The stars fell from the sky, and the heavens were torn open. People fled to the mountains and hid in caves, crying out for the rocks to fall on them and hide them from the wrath of the Lamb. But there was no escape. In the midst of this chaos, 2 witnesses appeared in Jerusalem. These men, dressed in sackcloth, preached in the streets, warning of the coming judgment. They performed miracles, calling down fire from heaven and turning water into blood. But after 3.5 years, the Antichrist had them killed. Their bodies lay in the streets for 3 days, and the world rejoiced, thinking they had won. But on the 3rd day, a voice from heaven called out, and the 2 witnesses rose from the dead. They ascended into the sky, and great fear fell upon those who saw them. At the same time, a massive earthquake struck, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed, and the rest were terrified, giving glory to the God of heaven. Then, the final events began to unfold. The armies of the world gathered in a place called Armageddon, preparing for a great battle. The Antichrist and his forces were ready to make their final stand. But as they prepared for war, the heavens opened once more, and a white horse appeared. Its rider was called Faithful and True, and on his head were many crowns. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and out of his mouth came a sharp sword. This was the return of Jesus Christ, the true King. He came not as a lamb to be sacrificed, but as a lion to conquer. The armies of heaven followed him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. With a single word, he defeated the armies of the Antichrist. The beast and the false prophet were captured and thrown into the lake of fire, where they would be tormented forever. After the battle, an angel came down from heaven, holding a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil, and bound him for 1,000 years. The earth was at peace, and Christ reigned with his saints. But the story did not end there. After the 1,000 years, Satan was released from his prison for a short time. He went out to deceive the nations once more, gathering them for a final rebellion. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them all. Satan was then thrown into the lake of fire, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they were tormented day and night forever and ever. Then the final judgment came. The dead were raised, and all were judged according to what they had done. Those whose names were not found in the book of life were thrown into the lake of fire. But those who were faithful were given new bodies and welcomed into the new heaven and the new earth. In this new world there was no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, and no more pain. The old things had passed away, and everything was made new. The holy city, the New Jerusalem, descended from heaven, shining with the glory of God. Its streets were made of pure gold, and its gates were made of pearls. The river of the water of life flowed from the throne of God, and the tree of life stood on each side, bearing fruit every month. And so, the story of the end times concluded with the triumph of good over evil, the restoration of all things, and the eternal reign of Christ. His followers lived in peace and joy, forever in the presence of their King.